So I want to talk a little bit about how you go from projects to process. Designers make projects, designers need to make design processes. I moved to New York in the aftermath of Superstorm Sandy, which had an incredible impact, and developed together with a Danish architect, Bjarke Ingels, this concept of the big U, the idea to really design community-driven resilience infrastructure on Manhattan's waterfront. And the way we developed that was to work intensively with the local communities. We thought this should not be only a sort of Robert Moses type project. This should also be very much a sort of community-driven project, in a sense, like why build a flood wall when you can build a park? And this was essentially one of the sort of flagship images of that original vision. And one of the ideas about the vision was that the big U was actually also a series of small U's, a series of compartments that could be individually developed, that would each sort of tie into a higher ground, so that the system would become a little bit more adaptive than 10 miles, $15 billion of infrastructure that you can never get built in a country that is as incompetent as building with public infrastructure as the United States. They've been asking to give me an international perspective.
I'll agree with that.
Right, and so we have been very fortunate to now be part of many of the projects of almost all of the projects that have come out of this. This is a view on the east side of Manhattan, and these projects are in different phases of design. Some of them are in construction. There's also some projects going on the western side. I will not talk too much about that now, because those are a little bit in a later phase. The first project, almost finished, is the East Side Coastal Resiliency Project. On the north end, we have integrated a flood wall and a number of floodgates in a sort of park-like landscape. In the southern part of the East Side Coastal Resiliency on East River Park, we have elevated the entire park. This is a drone picture of the during its construction, and basically created a new park on top of that East River Park. A little bit to the south of that, and I hope this runs, but it probably won't run unless you gently touch it. A little bit to the south of that, can you play this movie, please? Okay. A little bit to the south of that, a little bit to the south of that, we have another project, the Brooklyn Bridge, Montgomery Street Coastal Resilience, which has flip-up deployables under a highway. And then even more to the south of that, we are now working on the design of the Financial District Seaport Climate Master Plan, which is a double-layered landscape. One layer is a sort of passive protection against tidal flooding at about 13 feet, so that it will prevent tidal flooding from entering the city up well into the 21st century. And then a sort of second layer on top of that with additional public space in which we've built a series of flood walls and flood gates that will protect against storm surge flooding, which is of course the thing that caused Sandy. And so in the way to visualize it, this is the current situation. Again, we have a highway, a very constrained space there. And this is the first project that we're actually going in water, where we're adding land to create this double layer flood defense. And we hope that it will at some moment start looking like this. What is interesting about these projects, and that's the reason I show them, is that they all have their own internal logic that we discovered during the project, looking at all the different criteria that we were designing with. They all have their different flood protection approaches and their different time horizons. And what I want to talk today really is about this issue of time. Chris already described this diagram, which basically says you need to think about your lead time, you need to think about the functional life of adaptation, and we know that whatever we'll be building now and even designing now will be part of a very different climate reality than we are experiencing now, and we need to consider that. In the context of the projects that came out of the Big U, that meant that the East Side Coastal Resiliency is designed for about 50 years with a couple of feet extra that we managed to sort of squeeze in. But we've built the foundations so that we can add 3 more feet in case we have that necessary. The next project, the Brooklyn Bridge Montgomery Coastal Resilience, under this highway, which at some moment might be removed in a very constrained space, is designed for 30 years. That's why we allow these relatively risky flip-up deployables. The FIDA Seaport, because it's so damn difficult to build anything there, is really built for 100 years, well into the next century. And then to the north, in the East Midtown, which is where the hospitals are, because we're dealing with critical infrastructure, we're working at higher flood protection levels, right? And so understanding how that works across time is super interesting, super relevant for understanding how this will develop over time. So now that New York knows this stuff, and now that New York starts to understand that there are different pathways to projects, we started to ask ourselves the question, how can we in New York, but in other places all, maybe make a stronger connection between urban change, the uncertainty of a changing climate, as well as the different cultural developments in our work. And in order to do that, in New York City, we developed for the newly formed Bureau of Coastal Resiliency a program which is the New York City Coastal Futures Lab. We thought it was really important to think about the long-term future, because before you know it, now that New York is so proudly presenting these projects that have been done, they're going to do a lot of that work in the same way. And if you look at the longer term, and the New York City Panel of Climate Change came out with 2150 numbers, we see that this coastal flood risk is increasing in orders of magnitude, potentially. And that meant that these type of solutions, the one that we are very proud of, might not work everywhere. We sort of made a provocation, the back of the envelope, this is called, to say, well, if we're going to build the East Side Coastal Resiliency across the entire New York City coastline, it's going to cost $1.3 trillion. That's a little bit much. If we do things a little bit simpler, like the Army Corps is proposing in their very sophisticated way of doing planning, and we then adapt that for a sort of longer period of climate change, we could get here. But even building East Side Coastal Resiliencies across the city, we don't even have the space to do that. We don't have the space to build a Great Wall of China in terms of flood protection, to build 9 new central parks, or to really consider how we adapt all these houses. So that's where we took cue from the Netherlands and started to think, hey, they have had this sea level rise hackathon, where they started to think about these different models. Do we continue to protect, as we want to do in the Netherlands, to resist? Or do we build a new coast in front of the existing coast? Or do we accommodate, learn to live with water? And how do these different scenarios then relate to each other? Is that a model that we can work with in New York? Because in the Netherlands, within the knowledge program of sea level rise, we call it a knowledge program because it's too scary to call it a plan. We have been sort of developing these theses a little bit further. I was lucky to be the only non-engineer who could lead one of the consortia that sort of tried to put some further development and some numbers behind these different approaches. The protect, again, is what we have done so far. In the context of the Netherlands, if you put numbers behind it, we would need 20 kilometers of coastline just to have enough space to put the pumps that we would need to put the water out. If we would build a coast in front of the coast, we would still need almost the same amount of pumps, but we would have some additional buffer space, which would also happen to help with drought. And in the context of accommodate, we would need to start thinking about how do we make better connections to the economic centers on higher grounds. We need to diversify our infrastructure investment as well as letting water go. But the real interesting part of those researches has been that not only these things are possible, but boy, will they change the Netherlands, but also we need to understand, and I think many of you have talked about that, the importance of time in thinking about this. If you want to transition a country to adapt to a very different type of climate, you need time. And this is, for instance, what we think it would take to build cities on the higher ground in the Netherlands. If you're in a high emission scenario, you need to start with that process relatively soon. If we have a low emission scenarios, and please keep working on those low emission scenarios, you have much more time to sort of adapt and to sort of serve your changes on economic currents, so you can socialize things a little bit better. The transition will be much less disruptive. So we think that this issue of designing with time is really critical. We also think, and you've already seen that a little bit, and we've talked about that, how important it is that we approach these problems from a social-cultural perspective rather than a technical perspective. These problems from a technical perspective are really not that difficult. From a social-cultural perspective, oh boy. And so understanding how to socialize this information and maybe, like Chris said, using design to talk about that, to create these visions, to show how not only will we have to rethink our coast, but we need to, in an accommodate scenario where we don't pump the water anymore, we really need to create space for water in our urban environments. We need to, at some areas, maybe let water in. We need to create the linkages with agriculture, specifically in the Netherlands, where much of the water that we used is used for agriculture. That water won't be there in the future anymore because it will be much less or much too salt. And so really thinking about that social dimension, how to build those changes, and using design to do that is critical. Back to New York, we are now working with this Coastal Futures Lab in a super exciting way. I will not go into the results, but here it is also, we bring many of the people who know about this stuff into a room together to figure stuff out together and to sort of socialize the type of challenges that we have and to talk about how we can expand the tool sets in order to be able to adapt over time and figure out the right pathways to get where we need to be going, which maybe is this, but in the end is much more messy than this. We have great collaborators in that. This is Kate Orff. Here are some of the things that we are learning. It's really critical to combine the urgency and the opportunity of now with the need to keep these options open for the future. We need to broaden our adaptation tool sets. We need to engage communities and stakeholders. We'll be doing this stuff for a very long time. We need to understand how climate adaptation is aligned with urban change. We need to align with other agencies because they are the ones that are going to own these assets. So transition, how to think about change is critical. And mitigation is imperative because if the sea level rise stuff goes too fast, oh boy, are we in trouble. Thank you.